A person dies from heart disease every 5 seconds in the United States. Several people have died from heart disease already just from the start of this conversation.
The body is the best doctor that we have, and if we provide it with the right tools, I think our bodies are capable of the most incredible things.
In reality, the metabolism doesn't even work in speeds. The person who feels like they have a fast metabolism because they have to eat every 2 to 3 hours, they don't have a fast metabolism, they have an inefficient metabolism.
The time when you're not eating, you feel hangry, frustrated, you got the brain fog because you don't really give it that transition.
I was obese for most of my life up until the age of 24. 2007, I found myself being physically obese, mentally obese, ready to give up on life. What stopped me was thinking about my mother. I didn't want to cause that devastation for her.
My guest today, Ben Azadi, went through a weight loss transformation of 80 pounds in 2008. And ever since, he's been on a mission to help 1 billion people live a healthier lifestyle. Ben is the author of 3 best-selling books, which we'll mention. And many people refer to him as the health detective. He's considered a ketogenic and intermittent fasting expert. And today we discuss some incredible talking points, and some of my favorites being when we got into Ben's expertise on metabolic health. I think it is a top reason why people struggle to lose excess body fat. Ben gets into breaking down the signs of dysfunction and provides digestible tips on fixing metabolic dysfunction. I also found the conversation about protein fascinating. I think that so many of us think that we know about protein. And what I found out is it's so much more important, and we don't realize how many things can go wrong for us when we don't get enough protein. It's not as simple as just building muscle mass. So I know you're gonna love this episode, so have fun listening. Ben, it's awesome to have you here. I'm so excited. We talked a little bit about metabolic health, and I feel like we're so aligned, and I'm so interested in your expertise on this because I really believe that metabolic health is overlooked in the medical system. I don't think it's really something that we're addressing. And I think it is a point of contention. People don't realize like it's the reason why they're not losing weight. People have simplified this, and even dietitians and whatnot, as calories in, calories out, right? We hear that all the time. And a calorie is a calorie. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, if you're burning a calorie under a microscope or whatever, however I don't know how they test those calories, whatever. I'm not a scientist, but I know that they heat it and they test it and they see, calories, how they burn. Okay, so then under maybe that terminology, a calorie would be a calorie. But I think when you put it in your body and the way that your body uses different calories is a completely different aspect of looking at it. So I'm just going to open with that.
That's exactly right. The human body is more of a dynamic system versus this closed system that you're referring to, just burning a calorie to see how much it measures, right? First of all, you're correct, Misha, and thank you for having me here. I love your show and all the things that you're doing. But metabolic health, you're correct. It is so important. I think we saw that with what happened the last 4 to 5 years. A lot of people who did not have metabolic health had some serious issues. And the blessing out of what happened the last 4 years is that people are now starting to prioritize and understand how important it is to be metabolically healthy. Unfortunately, a lot of the information out there from dietitians and doctors, and I was one of them doing workshops on just counting calories, and I used to call it the science of fat loss. The problem with focusing on calories is that the body does not lose weight to get healthy. The body gets healthy to lose weight. When you're focusing on calories, it neglects what actually matters, which is hormones. So all roads lead to metabolic health through the metabolism. And simply put, I mean, we could get really complicated with how the metabolism works, but it simply means transform. That's what the Greek definition of metabolism is. Meaning, we could take food, whether it's all carbohydrates, protein, fat, and we could transform that into energy. Our metabolism could use that for energy, burn fat. Or we could use our own body fat as an energy source. Fasting helps you do that. Use that for energy and burn fat and feel good. A healthy metabolism could use whatever energy source is available, use it for energy, burn fat, and feel good. Unfortunately, 88% to 93% of Americans have an unhealthy metabolism. They have metabolic dysfunction. They are only burning sugar, glucose, carbohydrates, and there's nothing wrong with burning sugar, glucose, carbohydrates unless you're only burning sugar, glucose, and carbohydrates. It's going to age you fast. It's going to lead to a lot of oxidative stress. It's going to lead to insulin resistance and diabetes, which leads to cancer and heart disease. Heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States. A person dies from heart disease every 5 seconds in the United States. We've been on this podcast for a couple minutes. Several people have died from heart disease already just from the start of this conversation. 700,000 people every year die in the United States from heart disease. Well, what's the cause of this? Well, it's an unhealthy metabolism. And in 2016, the Mayo Clinic put out this study, and it wanted to determine how many Americans live an active, healthy lifestyle. And they used 4 characteristics, 4 criterias for whether or not they met this requirement of a healthy, active lifestyle. The first criteria was they do not smoke cigarettes. The second criteria was that they exercised moderate to vigorous activity about 150 minutes total per week. The third criteria was that they ate a healthy diet categorized as a low processed food diet. And the fourth one was that if you're a female, you have a body fat percentage under 30%. And if you're a male, under 20%. So let me ask you, I want you to guess here. What percentage of Americans hit those criterias?
Well, you know what's funny? I looked it up this morning. Isn't that ironic?
So you know the stat.
Yeah. So I had my body fat tested yesterday, and I was at 26%. So I'm in the healthy range, and I'm out of a training camp. It means I'm not in a training camp. So I'm in my kind of like hibernation mode, if you will.
Yeah.
Been enjoying life a little bit. But when I'm in tip-top shape, I've been as low as 13 or 14%,
wow,
which is pretty extreme for a female.
It is.
So I like to be right around 19%.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when I'm actually in my training camp, and that's usually where I like to sit, that I feel really good. I've got a lot of muscle, but I'm still healthy as a woman, because I experienced getting down really, really low, like below that 14%. And it had all kinds of hormonal effects on me that were not good. And it took me about a year to recover from that. So
wow,
I've been down that low. I don't recommend it. I didn't feel great there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm better in that like 16 to 19 range when I'm,
smart,
looking for performance, but also sustainability of my health and quality of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can relate to that. When I was obese, I lost 80 pounds in about 9 months, and I went from 34% body fat to as low as 6%. Although I looked physically ripped, I did not feel that great. Like, to your point, my hormones were tanked, and that was too low for me. But this study showed that only 2.7% of Americans hit those 4 criterias. They don't smoke, they exercise enough, they eat a healthy diet, and they have a healthy body fat percentage. Now, that was in 2016. Probably got a lot worse since COVID happened. So we know we have a big problem.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's 4 criteria. It's great to hit, but that's not even all of the criteria.
No.
When you think about all of the things that can go into really making somebody healthy, it's a great starting point to have all of those things checked off, but it's not everything.
That's correct.
So let's talk about the signs of metabolic dysfunction. Like, what does it look like if somebody doesn't know how to burn fat and doesn't know how to switch over between the two systems?
So there are 5 red flags or symptoms, whatever you want to call it. If you're a sugar burner, these are going to be giving you clues. And if your audience is listening to this or watching this podcast, and they say yes to 2 of the 5 questions I'm going to ask right now, there's a high percentage that they are a sugar burner and they're metabolically unhealthy. And then I'll give more of an advanced way to test. So the 5 questions are: number 1, do you have extra 20 pounds or do you have extra 20 pounds or more on your body of body fat? Extra 20 pounds of weight is what I'm trying to say. Number 2, do you feel tired after you eat a meal? Number 3, do you have skin tags? These are little skin tags that pop up typically around the eyelids, the neck, and the armpit area. It's a sign of insulin resistance. Number 4, do you have brown patches around your neck and your armpit area? A sign of insulin resistance. Wow. And number 5, have you ever been on a calorie restricted diet where you lost the weight and gained it back? That usually also contributes to insulin resistance. So if you answered yes to 2 of 5 of those questions, there's a high probability that you're stuck burning sugar. And the goal is to get you burning fat, to teach your body, teach your metabolism how to burn fat. If you are in that category of being a sugar burner, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be producing high amounts of insulin. And there's nothing wrong with the hormone insulin unless you call out insulin all the time. Insulin is one of those growth hormones, and it's an energy sensor. And it's kind of a bully, meaning when you activate insulin, your fat-burning hormones kind of go into hiding. They cannot coexist. And when you are eating frequently, the average person is eating all day long. My colleague, Dr. Don Klum, this is a crazy stat. He did a patient population study where he had all of his patients write down how many times they ate throughout the day, whether it was a meal or a snack. And the average person was eating 17 to 23 times per day.
Oh my goodness.
Even if it's healthy, Misha, it's glucose and insulin spike, glucose and insulin spike. When you do that for over a year, 2 years, 5 years, you create high amounts of insulin. It creates insulin resistance. And the crazy thing is that most studies are showing that you could have insulin resistance for 6 to 14 years without any of your blood sugar numbers changing. Your A1C, your fasting blood sugars could look completely normal, even though you have full-blown insulin resistance. So one of the things I talk about in my brand new book, Metabolic Freedom, is the importance of testing your blood fasting insulin levels. It's the most important test for your metabolism. You want that to be in the single digits. That means you have you're producing healthy amounts of insulin. It's a very sensitive hormone.
Wait, the insulin you're testing, not the blood sugar. Is that what you said?
You could
you are
test your
testing
blood sugar.
Okay.
That's great too. But even more important than that, you want to test fasting blood insulin. Yes.
I've never done that.
Do it. It's such an important test. And it's cheap if you have to pay out of pocket. And you want it to be between 3 and 7. The crazy thing about that test, Misha, is that so many people do blood work, like you do and I do.
Yep.
And we get this reference range on that report, right? It's the standard reference range. That standard reference range is factoring in every single American who has taken that test. And I already shared that most people are unhealthy. So you don't want to be the average of unhealthy people. So for example, this fasting insulin test, the standard reference range is between 1 and 25. But if your fasting insulin is 13, 17, 22, although your regular conventional doctor might not flag it as a problem because you're within the range, you have insulin resistance. And if that continues to happen for 6 to 14 years, now all of a sudden your pancreas is so burnt out by producing insulin that your blood sugars change so dramatically, and then you're diagnosed with prediabetes and then diabetes, and now you have a serious issue.
How long does it take someone to reverse this? And is full-blown diabetes reversible? Is pre-diabetes reversible? And is insulin resistance states reversible?
All of that is reversible. When I say diabetes, I'm referring to type 2. Now, type 1 is different. That's usually more of an autoimmune condition where you're either born with it or you develop it in your lifetime where your pancreas does not produce any insulin and you have to take insulin to live your life. Mm-hmm. That's type 1. But type 2, which is the most common, even if it's full-blown, even if you had it for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, is completely reversible. Because we have to think about this, and prediabetes and insulin resistance too, to answer your question. We have to think about it this way. Type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle condition that's treated with medication. And the medication doesn't get to the root cause of why the person has the diabetes. It's looking at the high blood sugar levels, but that is a symptom of diabetes, not the cause. So they get on a medication, they take insulin, and they lower their blood sugar levels on diabetes, and the doctor pats himself on his back saying, good job, your blood sugars are getting better, but the diabetes continues to progress. Then it leads to vision loss, amputation, kidney failure, cancer, heart disease. The sad truth is this: most people don't even die from diabetes. It's pretty rare. They die from the complications of the diabetes, the heart disease, the cancer. So you could actually reverse these conditions. I've seen it happen in weeks. And these are people who have been diabetic for years. They change their lifestyle. They get to the root cause, which is a hormone issue and an inflammation issue. The body starts to correct itself. The body starts to heal itself. The body is designed to heal itself. It has an inner physician and it's designed to heal itself. Now, some people might take months. Some people could take up to a year. But the bottom line is this: you can reverse it, whether you are pre-diabetic, insulin resistant, or even full-blown diabetic.
That's incredible. And I believe it. I mean, the body is the best doctor that we have. And if we provide it with the right tools, if we're connected with self, we take that knowledge and we apply it in our daily life, I think our bodies are capable of the most incredible things. You know, it's an amazing feat when you think about that, where you could have full-blown diabetes. And you go to a doctor and they're probably going to say, well, this is just, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And then you make a lifestyle change and you can totally reverse this and create a life right? That feels worth living again.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like it feels like, hey, this is good. This is what I want to feel like. And I think brain fog and a ton of those things go with it. It's not just as simple as like having high blood sugar, right? It's not just as simple as like, oh, I'd like to lose some pounds. I think that the slow decline, people don't always realize, right? That these things are part of this symptoms that you get when you have consistent high blood sugar and insulin running through your body.
That's right. Exactly. It's all that. It's not just the weight gain and the weight loss resistance, but like you mentioned, the brain fog, the fatigue, autoimmune conditions. High levels of sugar are so damaging to the body. The body is designed to have 1 teaspoon of sugar in the entire bloodstream. So I don't know if you've ever tested like your fasting blood sugars. Have you ever done that before?
I have done that.
So if you tested 80 milligrams per deciliter, like which is a really good fasting blood sugar, that is an optimal state. That's 1 teaspoon of sugar in the entire bloodstream. When you go higher than that, because you have insulin resistance, diabetes, et cetera, all the things we spoke about, that sugar does a lot of damage to the body. Number one, it strips nitric oxide from your blood vessels. Nitric oxide is a very important molecule that vasodilates your blood vessels. So it opens up your blood vessels, which allows nutrients to be delivered to tissues, oxygen. It allows things to move along. With the sugar increase in our bloodstream, it strips nitric oxide, which then vasoconstricts our blood vessels. So it makes it harder for blood flow and oxygen and nutrients to get to our tissues, including the brain. So you mentioned brain fog. This is what's happening. But when this happens, your heart has to pump harder. That leads to high blood pressure levels. That is the number one cause of high blood pressure levels. It's this destruction of nitric oxide through high levels of blood sugars. And the most common way people test their blood sugar levels is with an A1C, which is on a typical annual report. It's looking at your 3-month average of your blood sugar levels, pretty much your behavior for the last 90 days of your blood sugar levels. And it's categorized as if you are between the levels of 5.6% on this A1C, actually 5.7% on this A1C to 6.4%, you're classified as pre-diabetic. Once your A1C percentage gets to 6.5% or higher, you're considered diabetic. And I saw a recent study that I put in the book, Metabolic Freedom, that showed if your A1C is at 7.5%, which is diabetic, but if it's at that level for a year, you lose 100 days off your lifespan. So if it's at that level for 15 years, Misha, you lose 4 years off your lifespan. That is how destructive high levels of blood sugar is in your body.
Oh my gosh. Let that sink in.
Crazy.
That is insane. 100. I mean, and I like the way that you put it in a way people can actually see it's tangible, because I feel like we, say like, oh, this will shorten your life or lengthen your life. But people are like, oh, it's so far in the future. They just don't really think about it. But just think about 100 days being gone.
Every year.
Every year. Oh my gosh. So what are people doing to reverse this? What can be done?
The great news is that, like you mentioned, the best physician in the world is within the body. The body is incredible. God built the body to be self-healing. There's this innate intelligence that is just incredible. There's no physician outside of the body or supplement or surgery or shot or diet that could replace the healing capabilities of the body, right? So as long as you remove the interference, the body will heal itself. So if your issue is high blood sugar levels, it's probably because of what you're eating. The average American eats about 300 grams of carbs per day. They're not active, as we established, and they're eating throughout the entire day. Okay, so the first step is let's gradually lower your carbohydrates, because when we look at the blood insulin response from the 3 macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, it is the carbohydrates that will raise your blood insulin levels higher than any other macronutrient. Far beyond fat, far beyond protein. Protein is a very moderate blood insulin response. Fat barely moves blood insulin. So the first step is to lower your carbohydrates while you increase protein and fat from healthy sources. You start doing that in a matter of 7 days. You start lowering glucose, lowering insulin. You start burning fat because insulin blocks you from burning fat. You mentioned the calories in versus calories out thing. The calories matter, but they're not that important. It's insulin that is important. If you have a weight issue right now, or I should say a weight symptom, it's because you have high levels of insulin. So you're going to start to lose weight as a side effect of getting healthy. So that's the first step. The second step is you stop eating so frequently. You eliminate the snacking. Just have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3 meals a day. I always give the analogy of if you snack and graze throughout the day because we've been brainwashed to believe that it revs your metabolism.
I used to think that too. I used to think like throw a stick of wood on the fire, kind of keep that furnace going all day. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I really had that wrong for a while there.
Me too, Misha.
Yeah.
And a lot of us do, right? Because we've been brainwashed to believe that you need to keep this metabolism revved up. But it'll age you faster than anything else. The more frequent you eat, the faster you age. That is the truth.
One of these other myths that I would love to dispel is that sometimes I hear people say, man, I get hungry often. Like my metabolism is fast. Like it's going fast.
Yeah.
And I can't help but sometimes think that's not what I understand now, that's not a direct sign that your metabolism is working fast. It's kind of more of a direct sign that your metabolism only really knows how to burn one energy source, right? So that means something needs to come in order for your body to function, because it hasn't really kickstarted the storage engine, right? The fat burning engine. Mm-hmm. It's only kickstarted on this one, but this sugar burning system, once it runs low, it's like, well, we need to replace that with more sugar. Forget about the stored energy over here. We're not going to tap into burning fat. Why would we do that when we could just ask for more food, right? But then you don't ever get the health benefits of, the extra weight being lost, or, the plethora of things I think that come with being metabolically flexible. That means being able to transition easily between both of those systems.
You explained it so well. Exactly. In reality, the metabolism doesn't even work in speeds. It works in efficiency or inefficiency. The person who feels like they have a fast metabolism because they have to eat every 2 to 3 hours, they don't have a fast metabolism. They have an inefficient metabolism. Like you just said, they're stuck burning sugar. They're a sugar burner. They don't know how to burn fat. So if they go, God forbid, and they skip a meal, they get hungry and angry. They can't function. Their body can't burn fat for energy. They feel a huge energy dip because their blood sugar levels drop. Somebody who's metabolically flexible, they will go hours, days. I've done a 5-day water fast, days without food, but my body burns fat for energy. It produces ketones. That's what's giving me a fuel. That is the goal, to achieve metabolic flexibility so you could use whatever energy source is available for fuel.
If someone is trying to do that, so let's say they listen to this podcast and you know what, tomorrow I'm going to do a 16-8, fasting eating window. So I'm only going to eat for 8 hours and I'm going to fast for 16. And it is really hard. I'm talking really hard. They've got headaches. It's just terrible. It's miserable. Is there a process which people ease into this? Is it usually very challenging? How long does it kind of take? I know everybody's different, but generally speaking, what can people expect during that transition phase from going to sugar burner to teaching our body again how to use fat?
It's an important question. It's a good question. So let's get practical and tactical here and give your audience the exact steps. In Metabolic Freedom, I put it all together in a 30-day plan where it's really specific and detailed, but I'll unpack a little bit of the beginning of it and how to actually get from burning sugar to becoming a fat burner. I actually don't have them practice fasting yet. Okay. I first get them fat adapted, which takes about 6 days, meaning we gradually lower your carbohydrates every single day until you reach less than 50 total grams of carbohydrates per day. Once you've reached that point, you should be in fat burning mode. But there's a second thing you need to do at the same time. So first, it's a gradual decrease. You don't do it all in one day, because I don't want to make a change too fast. I don't want to create symptoms. When we make this transition, you do it a gradual approach every day, start to lower the carbs. By day 6, you're under 50 grams of carbs total per day. At the same time, you're following something called the 2-2-2 rule. The 2-2-2 rule, you start on day 1, and it is 2 tablespoons of butter or ghee every day, 2 tablespoons of coconut oil or MCT oil every day, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil or avocado oil every single day.
Okay, so all of those every single day.
Every single day.
So 2,
throughout
4,
your
6,
meals.
if I
Yeah,
could count,
correct.
right?
So it's about 6 tablespoons of fat. But you're doing that on purpose, because as you lower your carbohydrates, you
gotta replace it with something.
have to replace it and give your body a different energy source. So you're not eating these fats in one sitting. You're eating them with your meals.
Yeah, and this doesn't suck. I've put this, you put it on a steak, you get a nice steak
delicious,
out.
right?
It's so good.
Yeah.
Some grass-fed butter or ghee, and you just slather it.
Correct.
And it's delicious. And it really is satiating. I feel so full and content when I have a steak with butter and just people are like, are you crazy? You can't eat all that. I'm like, watch me.
Yeah.
I will, and I'm going to feel great about it.
Same, exactly. It tastes amazing. It's satiating. You get protein, you got fat. So you do those two changes. The third thing to do at the same time is you want to replenish your electrolytes and your minerals, because here's what's going to happen. As you lower your carbs, you lower insulin. Very important. You lose weight, but the most of the weight that comes off, you know this, with cutting it, it's water weight, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of water weight, and that's great. You're going to look lighter, feel
Well, that's
lighter.
inflammation, right?
It's inflammation, exactly.
So some of that body is getting cued, like, oh, we don't actually need to store as much. We don't have these inflammatory, properties going on in our
Correct.
body. So I notice that too. If I have a high carbohydrate meal, I will noticeably, like if I'm trying to take my Oura ring off or something like
Swells.
that, like, yeah, I just notice it now because I pay attention to it, where I used to think it was salt, because that's what everybody thinks. Everybody thinks that salt is this major water retention thing. I just want to just throw that myth right out of this room right now. I feel like in an otherwise healthy person, which most of us are, if you have a normal, relatively normal functioning kidney, number one job of it's to regulate salt. So it'll get rid of extra salt. It's not what's retaining the water on you. It's
right.
the carbs and the sugar.
Yeah, don't blame the salt for what the sugar did.
Yeah, don't blame the fat for it either.
Don't blame the fat either. Yeah, you're spot on, right? So it's the inflammation. So that's going to be great. You're going to lose extra water weight. But there's a problem here. The kidneys also start to shed this extra water weight. It goes through this diuresis sort of process, and you lose a lot of electrolytes and minerals. So we've heard of like the keto flu before, right?
Yep.
This is what's happening. So on day one, as you start to lower your carbs and incorporate that 2-2-2 rule, you want to also increase your minerals. You want to drink maybe electrolytes or take high quality minerals, like Beam Minerals is a great product out there. You want to just take your minerals and replenish those electrolytes. So you make that transition. And by day 6, you are now fat adapted. You could test that by checking your blood ketones. And if it shows 0.5 or higher, you're now burning fat instead of sugar. That's all that keto is. Well, there's more to it, but simply keto is a byproduct. Ketones are a byproduct of burning fat.
That's incredible. And it's really tangible, easy way to check that. Do you have anything that you recommend as far as like being able to check ketones? Because I know there's like pee strips, there's like oral strips.
Yeah.
Is there blood? I don't know what the best way.
Let's unpack all three. Yeah. There's 3 ketone bodies. There's acetone, which your breath expels, which is one ketone body. There's acetoacetate, which your urine expels, your body expels through urine. And then there's beta hydroxybutyrate, which is in the blood. So there's 3 different ways to test because there's 3 different ketone bodies. Breath, let me backtrack for a second. Urine strips are the most common because they're cheap, but it's not the most accurate. I would not recommend urine strips. It might give you some idea if you're burning fat instead of sugar.
It can also be really discouraging.
It could also be discouraging if you're doing everything right and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
But if you're not showing if you're not showing ketones in your urine, that's actually a good thing. It means your cells are actually using those ketones. So I wouldn't recommend urine. It's not that accurate. Breath meters have kind of been hit or miss over the years. Some devices show some good research, some devices not that good. I wouldn't recommend breath in general. Now, blood is the gold standard. So I use a Keto Mojo. The cool thing about a Keto Mojo, it has strips for blood sugar and strips for blood ketones. And you could use the same blood that you prick your finger, draw blood, put it on the strip for a ketone reading, put it on the strip for a glucose reading. And if your blood ketones are 0.5 on that machine, you're in ketosis. You're fat adapted. And that is the first step before you even practice intermittent fasting. Fasting is the second step I add to the equation.
I'm so glad to know that because I've recommended intermittent fasting to many people, my mom, my friends, you talk about it all the time. But I think what you just talked about is a really important step, and it's a really important element because it's not that you can't fast, and I'll speak from my personal experience, when you are using carbohydrates as your main source of energy. But it sucks a lot worse. Like the time when you're not eating, you feel hangry, you're frustrated, you got the brain fog, you get the headaches, because your body goes, I feel like, from thank you for this fast burning energy sugar, we're just hanging out here, and you don't really give it that transition of like, but here's how to burn fat. before you slam it into gear and just say, okay, now we're cutting off all the energy coming in and we're just going to put you in a high drive and see how you do. Right?
Exactly right.
That's my experience with it anyway. So I think that's such great information, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, no, it's important. And you're right. I've seen that a lot. And it's so much easier to practice fasting when you're fat adapted.
Yep.
You're going to feel great because you
I
have...
forget to eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just natural. And
Yeah.
you're a busy person. I'm a busy person. Like, that could be a really good thing for an
Right.
entrepreneur, right? Like,
Yeah.
just crush your day.
Sometimes they'll be like, oh man, it's 2:00, 3:00. I haven't eaten, but I feel fine.
You're metabolically flexible.
Right. And so my body will then maybe start to cue me that, like, okay, it'd be nice to have a little food now. We're approaching 18, 19 hours. You
Yep.
know, that's usually when I start to feel like, hey, it'd be nice to have something to eat now. I think my longest fast that I've done was right around that 47-hour mark.
That's awesome.
Yeah, 47, 48, real close
2
to
days,
that.
yeah.
2 days. So I haven't done longer than that, but I know that there's also a science to fasting for women and their hormones versus men. So I don't know if we'll get into that. Maybe we'll circle, depends how much time we have on
Round
this.
two. Maybe round two.
Maybe round two. But I do want to preface that, ladies, please pay attention.
Yes, please.
Maybe listen to Dr. Minnie Pelz, because she really broke it down for me in a way that was like, oh, this is mind-blowing. I had no idea that my hormones, I need to eat for those accordingly. I'm much different than a man. So fasting isn't the same for men and for women. We should take that into consideration. So
Yeah, very important. And she wrote the foreword to my book, by the way, Mindy.
Oh, she did?
Yeah,
I love that. She's great.
She's amazing. And you're right. And she's right. And also women who have a menstrual cycle do it differently than women who are postmenopausal. It's custom. And one little note on fasting. Fasting is like a chainsaw, right? A chainsaw, if you've read the user manual, could get you the job, you get the job done with a chainsaw if you know how to use it. Chainsaw could hurt you if you've not read the user manual, right? Fasting is like that chainsaw. Like, understand the user manual. It's different for men versus women, and make sure you do it accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. Something I really wanted to make sure to talk to you about, because I thought this was fascinating, is protein. So I think this is one of those things, again, people kind of look at it and say, well, I know what protein's for. It's, for building muscles. And why would it be so important if I'm not in the gym lifting because I'm not building muscles, right? So it is so much more important in the body. And I've listened to you talk, and I've learned so much from you about the importance. And even myself as a professional athlete, I know that aminos are important. I know that protein's important. I know how much I'm supposed to put in my body. I try to do 1 gram for whatever weight it is that I want to be at. So like if I start a training camp and I'm like, okay, I want to weigh in at 135, I'm right there. I'm eating 135 grams of protein every day. With that being said, though, that's an oversimplification. It is so important in the body, and I know that so much can go wrong when we don't get enough protein, which I have a feeling is a pretty common occurrence in today's diet.
Yeah, it is. And I'm glad you brought this up. There's something called the protein leverage hypothesis, which I wrote about in Metabolic Freedom. It's a hypothesis.
I got to get this book.
Yeah, you got to get the book.
It's good.
May 13th, but your audience can pre-order it now. Yeah.
Perfect.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. It's right up your alley. And in this protein leverage hypothesis, they hypothesize that the reason why people overeat is because they're not getting enough protein, and they're eating so much processed food, which is really low in protein, but they're eating so much processed food to get enough amino acids to meet their requirements. They're overeating, and that's the protein leverage hypothesis, which makes kind of sense to me. Here's why. As you mentioned, yes, protein is important for building muscle, preserving muscle, which is really important. Just on this note real quick, on metabolism and the muscle. Studies have been showing, for many years, people used to think that your metabolism slows down as you age. Oh, I'm 30. My metabolism is not the same as when I'm 20. Oh, I'm 40. It's not the same as when I'm 30. But the studies are showing that your metabolism pretty much goes unchanged until you are 60 years old. Then there's about a 0.7% decline every year at the age of 60. But here's why it happens. Muscle loss. So if you could preserve your muscle mass at the age 60, 70, 80, you could have the metabolism of when you were 21 years old at 91 if you preserve your muscle mass.
No way.
And protein helps you do that, by the way. Isn't that amazing?
I just have pause for a second and make sure that really soaks in, because that is incredible. I had no idea. I just assumed it was kind of like a slow degradation, which maybe it is if you're not...
If you're losing muscle and not metabolically healthy.
If you're not metabolically healthy.
Then that will happen to you.
Yeah. And no, I learned that muscle is your incinerator, it directly impacts your metabolism, right? So the more muscle mass that you have, the more calories you burn all the time. So if I have more muscle in my body while I'm sitting here talking to you, doing absolutely nothing but moving in my mouth, then I'm burning more calories than I would if I had less muscle mass.
That's
right.
Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. It raises your basal metabolic rate. Like you said, the amount of calories your metabolism burns just sitting on the couch or recording a podcast with me. But also, when you have more muscle mass, remember I spoke about the issue with insulin resistance, and 88%, 93% of people have insulin resistance. Mm-hmm. The more muscle mass you have, the more insulin sensitive you are. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Somebody weighs 200 pounds, it's a male. Another male weighs 200 pounds as well. But this person has a good amount of muscle mass. The other person weighs the same, but has half the muscle mass. They have a different experience with the same meal in terms of the insulin production. The person with the muscle mass could eat a whole bunch of carbohydrates, let's say 100 grams of carbs in that meal. They'll get a spike in glucose, like we all do. But since they have so much muscle mass, the right amount of muscle mass, I should say, that muscle mass acts like a sponge to absorb the glucose so your pancreas does not have to produce the insulin to clear the glucose. This other person who doesn't have enough muscle mass eats the same amount of carbohydrates, gets that glucose spike, but now they don't have the muscle mass to absorb the glucose. Their pancreas has to produce the insulin to clear the glucose. So muscle mass is like a sponge to help with insulin resistance. It helps with insulin sensitivity. Protein, amino acids, especially the essential amino acids, it's the best macronutrient to build and preserve lean muscle mass. There's another benefit to protein, but I want to know if you had a question on that follow-up.
I'm just loving all of this. I'm the muscle right now. I'm soaking this in like yes. a sponge. This is amazing. I also understood that the more fat that someone has on their body, also the more pressure that there is on mm-hmm. the muscles. So it actually gets harder for the insulin to, or the sugar to go into the muscle just from a pure pressure standpoint, which I thought was also really, really interesting. You kind of think about it in that sense of not only having more muscle, but having the access to the muscle, because fat can weave into and throughout the muscle tissue, just creates more pressure. So even from a standpoint of that, it is harder for your body to even access whatever muscle you do have sometimes if it's also mixed in with an excess amount of body fat.
Yeah, you're right. And that also occurs around our organs, including the pancreas, which mm-hmm. produces insulin, the liver, it's called fatty liver disease. That pressure, it's visceral fat around the organs is what I'm referring to. Highly inflammatory, a leading cause of chronic disease out there.
Yeah.
With protein, another benefit to it, especially as we talk about no more snacking, intermittent fasting, getting your protein requirement, which is exactly what you said, 1 gram of protein per pound of your ideal body weight is exactly what I recommend. It's what you do. Mm-hmm. That's the recommendation. When you get enough protein, it's very satiating. It activates hormones and chemicals called cholecystokinin, leptin, peptide YY. These are just signals to your brain and your body. You're full. You're satisfied. No need to overeat. No need to go to the pantry and have some Oreos or have some Cheetos. Like, this is what protein does. I'll give you an example of how this works and how carbohydrates do not do this. When I go to restaurants, let's say I go to a restaurant, a steakhouse, and I order like a 22-ounce ribeye, which I occasionally do.
Same.
Yeah, I love it.
Ribeye's my favorite.
We have to enjoy a ribeye soon.
That'd be great.
So let's say I go to this restaurant. We go together, and both of us, we eat a 22-ounce ribeye, bone-in. And the owner notices that we finished the entire ribeye, like we ate the entire thing. So he comes up to us and he goes, "Wow, I'm really impressed with you two. Just because I saw you both finish this entire ribeye, I'm going to give you 2 more ribeyes on the house. But I want you to finish it all, otherwise you have to pay for it," right? That might be very difficult to do. Maybe you could finish another 22 ounce. I don't think I can, but because the protein activates those satiety hormones and chemicals. Now, in this example, if that same restaurant owner said, "I'm impressed with you, you ate the entire ribeye, I'm going to give you a free dessert," can you eat the dessert now? Of course, because it does not activate those hormones and chemicals. So you can overeat carbs, you cannot overeat protein. So there's just so many benefits to getting enough protein.
I've had this experience personally, exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. Where it's just like I am full and content, and if I acknowledge that consciously, I'm like, no, I don't need dessert. I'm very, very content. But before I knew that, I've had that exact same thing. It was like I couldn't eat another bite of my meal. But if you put down, some ice cream in front of me, I could eat that. I have room for that.
Same.
Interesting. So that's a hormonal thing. Do you think there's a bit of just the way that our body, like the psychology of it, of like wanting sugar and sweets sometimes, is that?
Yeah, it's a social thing for sure, right? Where we've been, conditioned to have something sweet after a meal. Like it's definitely a conditioning thing, but there's also a dopamine hit from having the sugar, right? Like it feels good to have the sugar. So there's a lot of things going on.
So what happens if we don't get enough protein? Let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the side effects of being severely deficient? And what is severely deficient? So I ideally want to get 135 grams of protein. I don't think that I hit that every day.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I don't think that I do. But at what point am I actually getting like dangerously low where I may start seeing some bad symptoms, and what would those be?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I imagine your audience is probably thinking that because it might be difficult sometimes to hit that protein requirement, and that's okay. As long as you get 40 grams of protein at least one meal a day, you will stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Even if that's your only 40 grams, like you're doing one meal for that day, if you get 40 grams of protein at least once per day for one meal, you will stimulate muscle protein synthesis, where you could preserve lean muscle mass. Now, in general, you do want to get closer to your protein goals. If your protein requirement is 135 in your example, but you're getting 95 per day, but you're getting at least 40 grams of protein in one meal, you're going to preserve your lean muscle mass. Now, you could fill in the gaps. You could have essential amino acid supplements. I'm a big fan of using essential amino acid. That fills in the gaps. You could have protein powders and shakes to fill in the gaps. And it's okay to be in a protein deficiency some days. Like if you're doing a longer fast, you said you did 47 hours, you didn't have any protein. Sometimes I'll do 24 or 32 hours if I'm traveling. I don't eat when I travel, like when I'm flying. Yeah. So I'll be in a protein deficiency, but not every day. And if you're in a protein deficiency some days, that's okay, because your body will go through autophagy and clear out protein that is inflammatory, junky protein, for lack of a better word. And then when you refeed and get your protein requirements, you build back healthier protein. So I wouldn't be too fixated on getting it every day. And as long as you get the 40 grams at one meal, you're going to be okay.
Do you think that's so 40 grams at one meal? Is there a preference, whether that's like the meal that you break your nighttime fast with, or whether that's the meal that's later in the day? If we were going to prioritize that 40 grams of protein, do you recommend a certain time of day?
Yeah, studies are showing that you want to get most of your calories, including the protein, earlier in the day. Now, Misha, this is different than what I used to teach and say many years ago.
Well, I love that you can admit that and you say that and that you're highlighting that, because for me, that means that you're somebody it's a trusted source, because we're all learning. And if we want to stay staunch and never admit when we didn't know something that we know now, then I just don't think that's helpful. So this is a sign that you're growing.
Thank you.
And, I think that that's great. And it's the same thing goes for me. There was a lot of misinformation. There wasn't always the science out there that there is today. And we all thought the food pyramid was good for us. And, we prioritized eating healthy by eating carbohydrates, vegetables, and then maybe some meats and dairy if it fit in. But otherwise, a big bowl of pasta was a great idea back then. So please continue.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's important to unlearn and relearn, right? We're doing that all the time. So I used to say breakfast is the dumbest meal of the day. Skip breakfast, go and have lunch and dinner. And a lot of research is showing actually our circadian rhythm, our hormones for men and women, we're designed to have most of our calories earlier in the day. You actually get more fat loss. You're more insulin sensitive during the day versus later on in the day, especially at night, you're not insulin sensitive. You get more autophagy when you eat early in the day and have an earlier eating window. So that goes with protein. So the ideal way to do it is to have your first meal, the meal that you break your fast with, as that meal you're getting enough protein to stimulate that muscle protein synthesis.
It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so back to, if we don't get enough, what are the signs?
You're going to feel hungry all the time. You're going to have, if you're strength training, you're going to have a difficult time putting on muscle mass and increasing your volume in your strength training. You're going to have difficulty burning fat because, like you said earlier, when you have more muscle mass, you have a higher basal metabolic rate. Your metabolism burns more calories. If you lack protein, you'll have a slower metabolism. You're probably going to have cravings for carbohydrates and sugar. You're not cueing those satiety signals like you would do if you had enough protein. You could also, if that continues to happen, it'll lead to osteopenia, osteoporosis, bone fractures, hip fractures. It's a big issue for people that get older as well. And like the study showed, once you hit age 60, if you don't have enough muscle mass because you don't eat enough protein and you don't strength train enough, your metabolism will slow down about 0.7% every year at that time of your life.
Do we know how much the metabolism is impacted by people who are eating more protein versus people who are not getting enough? Are you aware of any studies that kind of highlight that in any way? I just had this thought in my head about, if there was ever a study that maybe had people doing even more like sedentary lifestyles, and just working out wasn't really part of it, but they just one's eating really high proteins and fats and one's eating carbs and sugars. Is there anything like that to explain this at all?
Not that I know on the top of my head, although there might be. I think that's a fantastic idea, but I can share this. I've noticed this anecdotally with friends who don't really want to enroll in my courses and learn how to do this, but they want me to give them one tip, and that will be get enough protein, and they'll not change anything, to your point, and still live a sedentary lifestyle, but they'll just hit their protein requirement. They'll start to lose weight. I've also noticed that with a few students who don't really incorporate all the things I teach them, but they'll change their protein requirement and they'll lose some weight. But it would be really interesting to have actually a dedicated study. And I would hypothesize, and I think you would agree, that the person who's getting enough protein, even though they don't change anything else, but the protein thing, they'll probably feel better and look better as well.
Yeah. Well, those are the building blocks for the kind of body I think your body wants to build, wants to have that muscle there for you to use if and when you need it. So if you give the right building blocks, because say, what am I going to do with this? Well, these are the essential things to build muscle. So I guess that's what I'm going to do.
That's right.
It would make sense. I think in all logic and hypothesis. But let's talk about self-image a little bit. I really wanted to pick your brain on that. I thought that was such a fascinating point that we were discussing. Yeah. So I'm going to let you kick that one off. I think you had some great things to say.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me about that, because I think this is probably the most important thing here, because you cannot outperform your self-image. Your self-image is how you view yourself. I'll give you an example. I was obese for most of my life up until the age of 24. At the age of 24, 2007, I found myself being physically obese, mentally obese, ready to give up on life, looking for ways to give up on life. And what stopped me was thinking about my mother, and I didn't want to cause that devastation for her, so I didn't take my life because of that. And I figured things out, where I used rock bottom as a platform for me to get out of that space. And I went through this incredible health transformation. I mentioned earlier, 34% body fat to 6% body fat in 9 months. And although I had this physical six-pack, I'm looking myself in the mirror, and my self-image of myself was that of an obese person, because that's who I was.
You were at 6% body fat.
6% body fat, and I still have the self-image of an obese man, because that's who I was.
That's what you identified with.
That's what I identified with.
You hadn't really changed that.
So here's what happened. I kept finding ways to get back to my self-image. Meaning, I started to eat more unprocessed foods. I started to gain more weight. I started to find things to sabotage what I've accomplished to go back to the self-image I had of myself. It wasn't until I changed my self-image that I was able to keep the weight off and actually live a life as a lean, healthy person, which is now my self-image, right? So many people, they go on a diet plan, they go on a weight loss program, they go on even a good program that teaches them how the hormones actually work, like the programs I have, and they start to lose weight. Let's say they lose 10 pounds in the first 30 days. But their self-image is an overweight person, because that's who they've been for most of their life, like me. They will find ways to course correct, sabotage themselves, go off plan, and the weight they lost is now found. See, we don't want to lose weight. We want to release the weight. We want to change the self-image. So the next question is, okay, how the heck do you change the self-image, right? Because if that is the problem, and by the way, this factors into every single area of our lives. It's not just weight loss, it's our finances. If somebody has a self-image of somebody who struggles to make ends meet and they have a really good month, let's say they're a salesperson and they have the best month ever and they're up 20%, the next month they'll be down 40% to even out their self-image. But at the end of the year, they're same place they were a year ago. Even though they had one good month, they will have a terrible month to even it out. Same thing with relationships. You'll find a way to mess it up. Your self-image is everything. You cannot outperform your self-image. And this goes back to a book called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz in the 1960s. This book talked all about this. I still read it over and over to this day, right? So how do you change the self-image? So where is the self-image? It's in our subconscious mind. And it's in a part of the subconscious mind called our paradigms. Our paradigms is a multitude of habits embedded into the subconscious mind that create the self-image, creates our behaviors, and essentially creates our destiny. So there's only two ways to change the paradigm. The first way is an emotional impact. And 9 times out of 10, an emotional impact is a negative experience, right? I'll give you an example. I lost my dad to the complications of type 2 diabetes back in 2014. It's a huge reason why I want to reverse it in 1 million people in the next 10 years. That was an emotional impact for me. It changed my paradigm, changed the way I thought, changed my self-image, changed everything for me, right? You probably have gone through several emotional impacts. Somebody watching and listening, you've gone through several emotional impacts. It changes the way you think. It changes your paradigm. That's one way. But to only do it that way and rely on an emotional impact, it's not fun because it's negative and it's really unexpected. So I would not recommend using an emotional impact as a way to change your self-image. The second way, which is the only other way, and it's the best way, is constant spaced repetition. Okay, what do I mean by that? That means you affirm this new identity to your conscious mind enough times that it goes into your subconscious mind and replaces the old self-image. So I'll give you an example of what I did, and I do it to this day with all of my goals. I wrote down on an index card, I'm so happy and grateful now that I'm at my perfect body weight. I am feeling good. I am looking great. The health I seek is now seeking me. I remove any blockages between us. I wrote that down and I read it and said it in my head every single day until that replaced my self-image, right? It's an affirmation, and people think affirmations don't work, but they haven't done it the right way. You write it in the present tense, and you put as much focus and emotion into that affirmation. And I do this to this day. I have goal cards that I carry with me that I read every day. These are 2 goal cards, financial goals, business goals, and I affirm these are the goals I want to hit next year. I am so happy and grateful, and it has my goal in present tense, and I read it every single day. I have, my book being a New York Times bestseller. I have a financial income there.
I was gonna say I am so happy and grateful now that part's pre-printed, and then you have in your handwriting, my published book Metabolic Freedom with Hay House is a New York Times bestseller.
That's right. And it's going to happen, right? So
it's also manifestation / what you're grateful for / I mean, this can be used in all kinds of things with goal setting, and also taking the time to appreciate how far you've come. Like, where are you? Like, look at that and be grateful, because I don't think people slow down enough to do that. It's always on to the next. What else do I have to do?
I'm guilty of that.
We're
for sure.
We're all guilty of it. And I think people who are entrepreneurs, people who want to be successful, people who have high drive, oftentimes suffer from this the most, because we get addicted to the accomplishment, and so we just want the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. But I think what you're saying here is slowing down and realizing your change and appreciating your growth and where you are, like how far you've come and where you are, is a really important part to the whole process of really accepting your growth.
Yeah, you said it well. There's a great book by Benjamin Hardy called The Gap and the Gain. It's all about that, right? When you're in the gap, you're focusing on you haven't done enough. You're comparing yourself to other people. When you're in the gain, you celebrate your wins. And I live a life, and I think you're very similar, and we'll learn more when I bring you on my podcast next, but I live a life where I am constantly happily dissatisfied, right? I'm grateful and I want to grow. I'm grateful. I love the journey. I love this. I look back, I celebrate it, and I want to continuously grow. the word content could mean so many things to me. I love the word content, but I'm also like, yeah, I'm content and happy and grateful, but I'm also not satisfied. I always want to achieve more. And I feel like you're very similar.
100%.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, and that's great. We're designed to want more. I mean, God cannot do for us what God wants to do through us, right? Our spirit, our DNA, like we want to continuously grow. We are our soul never dies. The body dies. But energy never is destroyed. It's always transferred. So our soul just transfers somewhere else. We want to continuously grow.
I love that. That's beautiful. I think that's a great place to let people absorb everything that was said. And I love you know, that you're a man of faith. I'm also a woman of faith. And I think that spiritually, this is all intertwined. It's all connected. And I think you said it so well. So I want to give you an opportunity. First of all, I want to say thank you for being here and all the knowledge that you've shared. And I could tell that this is really, you're passionate about helping people. And I think through your testimony alone, you can do that. But I see that you've done a lot of work to be able to explain this to people in a way that's digestible and that they can actually really make meaningful change in their life. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how else they can find you. And, tell us again, the book is coming out
May 13th.
May 13th. Great.
Your audience could pre-order it. There's actually some special gifts. I have exclusive interviews with like Dr. Fung, Mark Sisson, Gary Brecka for those who pre-order the book. And it's a mini course. If you go to metabolicfreedombook.com, you could get the book. If you're listening to this after May 13th, you could still get all those gifts if you order it through there. The book is... I love the book. I spent all of my 17 years of research have gone into the book. It's split up into the first part, the problems, second part, the solutions, and it's all tied into a 30-day plan to achieve metabolic freedom. There's a chapter in the book, chapter 10, that's my favorite chapter. It's all about the self-image, by the way, and I give an affirmation for you to use, but it's all about how your thoughts influence your metabolism, influence health or disease. So that's the best place. And my main website is benazadi.com. I have my Metabolic Freedom podcast, which Misha is about to come on right now. And I'm also grateful for you. You're a great interviewer. I love the work that you do. You're a genuine soul, authentic soul, and I really enjoyed the conversation today.
Thanks, Ben. Let's go continue this the other way around. I'll get in the hot seat on your side.
Let's go.
And we'll have a fun conversation. So thanks for being here today, and everybody, I hope they enjoyed this. I know that I did. I took a lot away from that, a lot of mental notes, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Misha.
The Built for Growth podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Our content may include sponsorship and affiliate links through which we earn a small commission on sales made through those links.